If you came of age in the 1990s, you knew Samantha Mathis. She was the cool, intelligent rebel in Pump Up the Volume and stood with quiet dignity in Little Women. For a fleeting moment, she was the it girl, the thinking man's ingenue poised for superstardom. Then, as happens in Hollywood, the narrative seemed to fade. The magazine covers moved on, and for many she became a face associated not with her own bright future, but with one of the industry's darkest, most public tragedies. But what if that disappearance was an illusion? What if the fading spotlight wasn't an end but a profound transformation? This is the story of a woman who refused to be defined by the grief that the world associated with her. Born into an artistic dynasty, she quietly, painstakingly built a new identity. This is the story of how the it girl of 1993 vanished. In her place, one of Hollywood's most passionate advocates and formidable leaders was born. She was born on May 12, 1970, in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, into a line of formidable actresses. Her maternal grandmother was Gusti Huber, a celebrated Austrian actress. This was old-world artistic royalty. Gusti had begun her career in Vienna before becoming a well-known film star in Germany in the 1930s and 40s. This was a tradition that had nothing to do with celebrity. It was about craft and one of the most prestigious stages on the planet. This was a tradition that had nothing to do with celebrity. It was about craft, dedication, and a connection to a European artistic lineage that was centuries old. It was passed down to Samantha's mother, the woman who would become the single most formative influence in her life, Bibi Besch. Born in Vienna, Bibi carved out her own impressive career in Hollywood, but it was the career of a working actress in the truest, most grueling sense of the word. Bibi Besch was not a superstar. She was a that woman actress, a face you recognize from everything, a performer of immense skill who elevated every project she was in, from Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, to countless television guest roles. She would go on to earn multiple Emmy nominations, a testament to her skill and the high regard in which her peers held her. This artistic inheritance came with its own immense, grinding complexities. Samantha's parents, Bibi and Donald Mathis, divorced when she was just 2, perhaps 3 years old. From that moment, it was just her and Bibi. There was no shared custody, no every other weekend visits. It was a tribe of 2. Samantha was raised by a single mother navigating the notoriously difficult, often predatory terrain of Hollywood in the 1970s and 80s. This upbringing was her education. It was anything but conventional. It was a childhood spent in the trenches of the industry. Samantha didn't just see the glamour, she saw the reality. She saw the auditions, the hope, and the constant stream of rejections. She saw her mother, a woman of incredible talent and poise, having to fight for roles, to navigate agents and casting directors, to deal with the casual sexism of the era. She saw the financial instability that is the bread and butter of the actor's life, the anxiety between jobs, the feast or famine cycle that defines 99% of the profession. She saw the sheer, unglamorous, white-knuckled tenacity required to build a life, pay a mortgage, and raise a child in the arts. It was an education no acting class could ever provide. Samantha wasn't just watching her mother perform on screen, she was watching her perform the miracle of a stable life in an unstable world. She was the child sitting in the back of the car while her mother ran lines for an audition, the kid in the trailer on set, the silent observer of 1,000 industry anxieties. She learned the rhythms of the business not as a dream, but as a job. At the same time, she was steeped in the other side of her lineage, a tangible link to her grandmother's world, and the hallowed, almost mythical world of European high art. This duality defined her: one foot in the practical commercial hustle of LA television, the other in a tradition of serious artistic craft. She was surrounded by art, by performance, and by the powerful, complex stories of these two women who had come before her. Perhaps it was inevitable then that the bug would bite. Despite her mother's best efforts to shield her from the industry's inevitable hardships, Samantha made up her mind. At just 12 years old, she declared her intention. It wasn't a question, it was a statement of fact. She was going to be an actress. BB, who knew exactly what that path entailed, tried to dissuade her. We can imagine the conversation filled with a mother's love and a professional's warning: this business will break your heart. But the pull of the dynasty, the call of the craft, was too strong. This was a 12-year-old who had already seen, firsthand, what the life looked like, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and had decided, that is what I will do. Her very first taste of the business was symbolic. She started as so many do in commercials. The records are a little fuzzy. Some say it was a baby product alongside her mother. Others, more humorously, point to an advert for Always Slender pads, just for teens. It was a far cry from the hallowed stages of Vienna, but it was a start. It was a job. It was the working actor side of her DNA winning out. At 16, Samantha Mathis was officially a professional. Her start was a grind, a period of paying dues that defines almost every actor's story. She landed roles in two short-lived television series in 1988, Aaron's Way and Night Watch. Neither set the world on fire. They were footnotes, learning experiences. She was honing her craft, learning how to hit her marks, how to live in front of a camera. But the star-making role, the one that would define her for a generation, was just around the corner. It came in 1990. The film was Pump Up the Volume. The role was Nora De Niro, a quiet, observant student who, on her own, uncovers the true identity of the town's subversive pirate radio DJ, Hard Harry. The script, penned by director Alan Moyle, was electric. It was a cultural hand grenade, perfectly capturing the pre-internet, pre-Nirvana angst of suburban youth. It was a story about alienation, censorship, adult hypocrisy, and the desperate, primal need for an authentic voice. And at its center were two characters: the voice, Hard Harry, and the detective Nora De Niro. The role of Hard Harry, the shy by day, rogue DJ by night Mark Hunter, was played by the biggest, most electrifying teen idol of the moment, Christian Slater. Slater was at the absolute zenith of his young Jack Nicholson fame, coming off the dark, iconic Heathers. He was the walking embodiment of cool, dangerous, anarchic energy. Whoever was cast opposite him couldn't just be the girlfriend. She couldn't be a passive, adoring face. She had to be his intellectual equal, his foil, and in many ways, his superior in courage. The role required intelligence, intensity, and a quiet, grounded strength. But Samantha knew, with the kind of industry-bred instinct she'd had since childhood, that she couldn't just walk in and read. She had to be Nora De Niro. The notes on her life reveal a fascinating, deliberate, and career-defining choice. She dyed her naturally blonde hair jet black. This was not a studio mandate. This was not a director's request. This was a 19-year-old actress making a conscious, powerful decision to shed her innocent, pretty image. This act was a declaration of war on the blonde ingenue archetype. It was a rejection of the soft, non-threatening roles often handed to young women. With that one act in a salon chair, Samantha Mathis was signaling to the casting directors, and perhaps to herself, what kind of actress she intended to be. She wasn't just another girl from LA. She was an artist. She was serious. She was strong. She was Nora. The black hair was a costume, yes, but it was also a shield and a weapon. It was an act of taking control of her own image, of defining herself before the industry could do it for her. It worked. She walked into the audition, and she was Nora De Niro. The chemistry between her and Slater was immediate and undeniable. It wasn't the fiery, self-destructive chemistry he'd had with Winona Ryder and Heathers. It was something different, something more intellectual. It was the spark of two brilliant, lonely minds recognizing each other. She wasn't just the girlfriend, she was the catalyst for the plot's entire second half. She's the one who hunts him down, the one who confronts him, and the one who ultimately masterminds the film's climactic act of rebellion. The film was released in August 1990 and became an immediate cultural touchstone. It was not a massive blockbuster, but it was a critical and cult sensation. Roger Ebert gave it 3.5 out of 4 stars, calling it a brilliant, angry, and truthful film. The reviews singled out the electric dynamic between the two leads. The film captured a moment. And overnight, Samantha Mathis was no longer just Bibi Besh's daughter. She was Nora De Niro. She was officially an it girl. The term it girl is often misused, but in the early 1990s it meant something specific. It meant you were not just famous, you were cool. You were on the cover of Sassy and Interview magazines. You were the face of a new generation, the one the critics loved and the audiences wanted to be. And for the next 5 years, Samantha Mathis was it. This role kicked open the door to a run of films that defined the first half of the 90s for her. She became one of the most recognizable and in-demand young actresses in Hollywood, and her choices reflected a savvy, or perhaps instinctual, understanding of how to build a diverse, resilient career, an understanding she'd clearly inherited from her mother. She didn't just try to repeat Pump Up the Volume. She diversified. In 1992, she made a massive commercial pivot. She lent her voice to Krista, the curious, powerful fairy protagonist, in the animated hit Fern Gully: The Last Rainforest. This was a brilliant move. The film, an explicit, if simple, environmentalist allegory, was a huge box office success for millions of children, the millennial generation just then coming of age. Her voice, warm, intelligent, and strong, became synonymous with magic and the nascent environmental movement. It was a massive commercial success that cemented her status as a household name. Then came 1993, a year of dizzying highs and bewildering, life-altering lows. It began with her first major blockbuster payday, Super Mario Bros. This film is now the definition of a cult flop. It was the first major live-action adaptation of a video game, and the production was a famously chaotic, surreal, and often nightmarish experience. The script was reportedly being rewritten on the fly. Mathis starred as Princess Daisy, reimagined as a gritty NYU archaeology student, opposite the legendary Bob Hoskins as Mario, and a young, fiery, and rising star named John Leguizamo as Luigi. The film was a bizarre, chaotic, critically derided mess, and yet it endures. Its sheer, unadulterated strangeness has given it a devoted, unironic following. For Mathis, it was a practical, professional choice. It was a blockbuster paycheck. It was a chance to work opposite an Oscar nominee like Bob Hoskins. And it was a lesson, likely echoing her mother's wisdom, that sometimes you take the job for the money, you survive the chaos, and you move on. The set was also where she began a relationship with her co-star, John Leguizamo. They were a young, hot, creative couple navigating the strange, sinking ship of this multi-million-dollar production together. She was 22 years old, starring in a massive summer movie and dating her charismatic co-star. From the outside, this was the dream. But it was her other film in 1993 that would change the course of her life forever. It was a small, earnest, character-driven film called The Thing Called Love. After the surreal, effects-driven chaos of Super Mario Bros., this must have felt like a return to the craft. The film, directed by the legendary auteur Peter Bogdanovich, was a gentle, atmospheric ensemble piece about four young dreamers trying to make it as country musicians in Nashville. On paper, it was a blip, a small artistic project between blockbusters. In reality, it was a pressure cooker of young talent, a snapshot of a generation on the verge. Her co-stars were Dermot Mulroney, Sandra Bullock, and the single most acclaimed, mythologized, and brilliant actor of his generation, River Phoenix. The set was, by all accounts, a transformative experience. Away from the pressures of Hollywood, the young cast bonded deeply in the musical, humid atmosphere of Nashville. Mathis and Sandra Bullock in particular clicked instantly, forming a deep, genuine friendship that would endure for decades. And then there was River. At 23, River Phoenix was more than a movie star. He was a prodigy. He was the Oscar-nominated, ethereal talent from Running on Empty and My Own Private Idaho. He was also famously a child of a troubled, eccentric, and nomadic family, brilliant, beautiful, and carrying the weight of the world. Mathis arrived on set dating John Leguizamo, but the connection with Phoenix was immediate, undeniable, and intense. He was 23. She was 23. He was the troubled, brilliant prodigy. She was the intelligent, grounded it girl with a dynasty in her blood. Their romance blossomed on the set, fueled by the music, the Nashville nights, and a deep intellectual and spiritual connection. The archives are clear. She ended her relationship with Leguizamo to be with River Phoenix. This wasn't a casual fling. It was a seismic, life-altering love. They were, for a brief, shining moment, the new golden couple of young Hollywood. As this new, profound relationship was blossoming, the momentum of her career seemed utterly unstoppable. The choices she made, or that were made for her, were flawless. In 1994, she landed a prestige role as the adult Amy March in Gillian Armstrong's beloved definitive adaptation of Little Women. In a cast that included Winona Ryder, Susan Sarandon, and Claire Danes, Mathis held her own, bringing a flawed, fiery, and deeply human complexity to the often misunderstood Amy. The film was a critical and commercial smash. From there, she moved straight into the White House. In 1995, she starred in The American President, a film directed by Rob Reiner and written by Aaron Sorkin. She played Janie Basden, the sharp-witted, intelligent, and highly capable personal assistant to the president. She was holding her own, trading sharp Sorkin pen dialogue with Michael Douglas, Annette Bening, and Martin Sheen. This was the A-list. In 1996, she circled back to where it all began, reuniting with her first co-star, Christian Slater, for the John Woo action blockbuster Broken Arrow. It was a massive commercial hit, but more than that, it was a symbolic, full-circle moment. The teen angst of Pump Up the Volume was a distant memory. When asked in interviews about their on-screen kiss 6 years after their first, she famously and wryly remarked that it was like kissing my brother. They were professionals now. They were friends. They were survivors of the 90s teen idol storm. She had it all. An indie cult classic, a massive animated hit, a notorious cult flop, a defining literary adaptation, a prestige political dramedy, a blockbuster action hit, A-list co-stars, critical acclaim, commercial success, a high-profile, deeply authentic romance with the most respected actor of her generation. She was 26 years old and on top of the world. But the world the public saw was a lie. The narrative was a complete fabrication. The timeline the public consumed was a seamless, upward trajectory, but it was an illusion. Because behind the scenes, between the intimate, hopeful joy of the thing called Love Set and the prestigious release of Little Women, Samantha Mathis's life had already been shattered, irreparably and completely, on a dark, dirty sidewalk in West Hollywood. The date was October 30th, 1993. Halloween Eve, Samantha Mathis and River Phoenix, both 23 years old and by all accounts deeply, truly in love, were in Los Angeles. The plan for the night was simple. They were to go to the Viper Room on the Sunset Strip, drop off River's younger siblings, Joaquin and Rain, and then leave. What happened next has been dissected, mythologized, and sensationalized for decades. It has become one of the foundational tragedies of modern Hollywood. But for 25 years, Samantha Mathis remained almost entirely silent, forced to carry the unimaginable trauma of that night while the world picked over the grisly public record details. She was just the girlfriend, a witness, a footnote in his story. It wasn't until 2018, in a raw, courageous, and heartbreaking interview with The Guardian, that she finally told her side, and her account is chilling, not for its sensationalism, but for its quiet, creeping, and all too human dread. She said she knew almost immediately that something was wrong. As soon as they entered the club, she felt a vibe, a darkness, an energy that made her uncomfortable. She later clarified, "I didn't see anyone taking drugs, but he was high in a way that made me feel uncomfortable." They were supposed to drop off his siblings and leave, but River was pulled inside, told he was going to play music with the band. It was a fatal last-minute change of plans. This was the moment the night turned. Her memory, as she recounted it, is fractured, haunted by the what-ifs. She remembers the club being oppressive, dark, and loud, and then at some point she made a simple, mundane human decision. She went to the bathroom. When she came out of the bathroom, she couldn't find him. And then she saw the commotion. She saw him being pushed out the side door of the club by a bouncer. He was being ejected. In her initial confusion, she had no idea what had actually happened. She believed in her terror and confusion that they had been in a fight. She ran out of the club screaming his name and found him on the pavement. He was convulsing. He was seizing violently on the cold concrete of the Sunset Strip. This was the moment the world ended. The it girl died right there on that sidewalk, crouching in horror. The intelligent, capable, in-control woman she had built, that person was gone. In her place was a 23-year-old girl, watching the love of her life die. The chaos that followed is the stuff of public record. His brother Joaquin, then just 19 years old, made the desperate, now infamous 911 call, a recording of pure, youthful panic that was later despicably sold and broadcast to the world. The ambulance arrived. They worked on him right there on the sidewalk. They rushed him to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, and in the sterile, fluorescent-lit cold of the early hours of October 31st, 1993, River Phoenix was pronounced dead. The cause was an overdose of heroin and cocaine, a speedball. At 23 years old, Samantha Mathis had watched the man she loved die violently in one of the most public, ugliest ways imaginable on a Hollywood sidewalk. The aftermath was not a time of quiet grief. It was an inferno. She was instantly and inextricably linked with the darkest side of fame. She was hounded. This was the era of hard copy and a current affair, the dawn of the rabid 24/7 celebrity tragedy industrial complex. She was the woman who was there. Cameras were thrust in her face. Reporters screamed questions at her. She was not a grieving partner. She was a witness. The bright, promising it girl was now in the public's eye a figure of tragedy. Her life was split in two. There was before River and there was after River. She did the only thing she could think to do. She fled. She did what her mother had taught her to do. What was in her DNA, she worked. She took a role in a film called Jack and Sarah, 1995, a British romantic comedy. The critical part of this decision was not the role, it was the location. It was shooting in London. It was 5,000 miles away. It wasn't a career move. It was a survival mechanism. It was an escape pod. She had to escape Los Angeles, escape the cameras, escape the whispers and the pity. We can only imagine the strength it took just months after watching her partner die to get on a plane, fly to a foreign country and pretend, to show up on set, to learn lines, to hit her marks. It was the ultimate heartbreaking, the show must go on moment, a testament to the ironclad professionalism that had been drilled into her since birth. And then she returned. She returned to Los Angeles, the city that was now for her a graveyard. And she kept working. This is the part of the story that is the lie, the part the public saw. Her next film was Little Women. Think for a moment of the profound psychological dissonance. She was 24 years old, hollowed out by a grief so total and so public that it's a miracle she could stand. And she was tasked with playing the fiery, ambitious, and vibrantly alive Amy March. The professionalism it must have taken to deliver that performance is staggering. Then came The American President. She was back to playing a version of her pump-up-the-volume self, but all grown up. Janie Basden, the sharp, competent, in-control professional. She was performing competence, intelligence, and strength, all while her internal world was, by any reasonable estimation, a pile of ash. Then came Broken Arrow. This was the full circle reunion with Christian Slater. But the context was so different. The teen angst of Pump Up the Volume was a childish, innocent dream compared to the reality she had endured. The innocent, edgy girl who had dyed her hair black was gone. In her place was a 26-year-old woman who had seen the absolute worst of what this life and this industry had to offer. She was functional. She was a professional. She was moving forward. She had survived. And then just as she was perhaps finding some semblance of solid ground, just as the scaffolding of work was beginning to feel stable, the universe delivered its second devastating and truly final blow. In 1996, her mother, her anchor, her tribe of two, her entire support system, Bibi Besh, died of breast cancer. She was only 54. This was the event that truly and completely broke her. The loss of River was a catastrophic shock. It was a lightning strike, a violent public theft of her future. But the loss of her mother was something else entirely. It was the loss of her past and her present. The one person who understood the industry, the one person who had guided her, the one person who was her entire family, was gone. The woman who had taught her how to survive Hollywood was the one person she needed to help her survive this. And now she was gone too. In the span of less than 3 years, Samantha Mathis had lost the love of her life in a brutal public tragedy and the single most important person in her world to a private, cruel disease. This, the record shows, is when Samantha Mathis truly vanished. The work stopped. She stopped acting for more than a year. The career, the fame, the it girl persona, it was all revealed to be a meaningless, toxic mirage. What was the point? She had played the game, she had reached the top, and it had cost her everything. In the crucible of this double tragedy, this absolute annihilation of her personal life, a profound shift occurred. This was the true death of the It Girl. She wasn't just a survivor of a tragedy anymore, she was an orphan. She would later reflect on this time, noting that it forced her to re-evaluate everything. She was done. She was done with the shallow pursuit of fame. She had seen, in the most brutal first-hand way, what it cost. She had seen its emptiness. When she eventually returned to acting, she would be a different person. The roles she chose, the path she took, was no longer about becoming the biggest star. It was about the craft. It was about survival. And though she couldn't have known it at the time, it was about finding a new, more profound purpose, one forged in the fire of this unimaginable twofold loss. The girl who had dyed her hair to look strong was now being forced to become strong, or to disappear completely. The woman who returned was not the woman who had left. When Samantha Mathis vanished for that year, it was not a sabbatical. It was a necessary primal retreat into darkness. The It Girl had been a construct, and that construct had been obliterated. The Samantha who slowly, painfully, and quietly reemerged in the late 1990s was a different entity entirely. She was an orphan. She was a survivor. And she was, by her own account, done with the shallow pursuit of fame. So what does an actress do when she is done with fame? When the entire machinery of stardom has been revealed as a toxic, empty, and lethal mirage? She works. The post-tragedy career of Samantha Mathis looks completely and fascinatingly different from her early 90s ascent. The trajectory changed. She was no longer aiming for the blockbuster. She was, in the purest and most profound sense, honoring the other side of her dynasty. The woman who returned was, in her very soul, the daughter of Bibi Besh. She became a working actor, and the first major notable role she took upon her return was not just a job, it was a thesis statement. In 2000, she took the role of Courtney Rawlinson in the film adaptation of Bret Easton Ellis's American Psycho. This choice is, upon examination, one of the most brilliant and subversive decisions of her entire career. The film itself is a savage satire of the 1980s culture of status, consumerism, and profound spiritual emptiness. And who does Samantha Mathis play? She plays Courtney Rawlinson, a woman so profoundly medicated, so deeply detached, so utterly hollowed out by the same shallow pursuits that she cannot even recognize the monster sleeping next to her. This is not a comeback role. This is an act of artistic commentary. Here is Samantha Mathis, a woman who had just walked through the real fires of death and grief, returning to the screen to play a woman who represents the very superficiality that she had just decisively rejected. Her performance is a masterclass in detachment, playing a hollow, status-obsessed woman, the very embodiment of the world she had personally and painfully renounced. And then, that same year, she appeared in a film called Attraction. This film is, in its own way, just as important. It holds the unfortunate distinction of a 0% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. This detail is not a criticism, it is a celebration. It is the proof of the thesis. The It Girl is terrified of a 0% rating, but Samantha Mathis was no longer an It Girl. She was a working actor, and working actors work. They are not afraid of a flop because a flop doesn't define them. Their work ethic defines them. Like her mother, Bibi Besh, who had a resume a mile long, Samantha was now liberated from the tyranny of the perfect career. She was no longer afraid. What was a bad review going to do to her? She had survived real horror. This liberation is seen in the other film roles she took. In 2004, she played Maria Castle in The Punisher. This is, on paper, a thankless role. She is the hero's wife who is brutally murdered in the first 10 minutes to provide the hero with his motivation. The It Girl would never take this role. It's a glorified cameo. But a working actor takes this role, does the job, and moves on. She was no longer on the A-list. She had, it seems, chosen to leave it. She was now a free agent, a gun for hire, a craftswoman. But the real story of her resurgence, the true home of her new identity, was not in film. It was in television. In the early 2000s, the golden age of television was just dawning. TV was beginning to be the place where character actors, especially women over 30, could find the complex, nuanced, long-form roles that the film industry was no longer providing. And Samantha Mathis, with her pedigree and her undeniable craft, became one of those dependable, revered actors who elevates every scene she's in. In 2001, she took a major role in the sweeping, star-studded TNT miniseries The Mists of Avalon. In 2004, she starred in the TNT remake of Stephen King's Salem's Lot. In 2007, she landed a memorable multi-episode arc on Lost, which was, at that moment, the biggest show on television. And then, the true sign of the working actor, she became a regular presence in the Law and Order universe, with multiple appearances on Law and Order, Special Victims Unit across 2 decades. This is the definition of the Bibi Besh career. You show up, you are a professional, you are versatile, you are reliable, and you are respected. She had recurring roles on shows like Under the Dome, and then 2 roles emerged that felt deeply symbolic of her transformation. From 2015 to 2016, she played Justine Feraldo, a hard-as-nails pragmatic New York City councilwoman in Guillermo del Toro's The Strain. And in 2019, she joined the cast of Billions as Sarah Hammond, the formidable, efficient, no-nonsense chief operating officer of Taylor Mason Capital. She was, in essence, a boss. Art was imitating life. Because in the real world, in the years she was playing these tough, competent professional leaders, Samantha Mathis was quietly becoming one. The disappearance was an illusion. She didn't fade away. She transformed. She had been haunted by the ghost of her partner, the ghost of her mother, and the ghost of her own it girl past. And she had decided with a quiet, iron-willed strength to exorcise them all. She had traded the volatile, empty A-list for the stable, respectable, and craft-driven life of a character actor. She had escaped. She had survived. And now, armed with the knowledge of how the industry really works, its highest peaks and its darkest, most predatory valleys, she was about to find her true calling. She had spent 2 decades rebuilding her life and career in the image of her mother. Now she was about to step into a new role, one that would allow her to protect all the other working actors just like her. She was no longer just an actress. She was becoming an advocate. The woman who returned to acting in the late 1990s was not a star. She was a survivor. And the career she built was not one of fame. It was one of work. She had become, in the truest and most honorable sense, the daughter of Bibi Besh. But for Samantha Mathis, it was not enough. It wasn't enough to simply be a working actor, to honor her mother's legacy by replicating it, because she knew with an intimacy that few could claim what that life cost. She knew the anxiety. She knew the instability. And she knew from the trauma of her youth how this industry, the machine, could consume its most vulnerable. She was haunted by the vulnerability she had experienced, both personally and generationally. She had seen the machine from the absolute highest peaks of 1990s it girl fame, and from the darkest, most predatory valleys of tragedy. She had watched it chew up and spit out the love of her life. She had watched it grind down her brilliant Emmy-nominated mother for decades. And at some point, the quiet, working actor made a decision. It was not enough to survive the machine. It was not enough to find a quiet corner within it. She was going to be one of the people who fixed it. This was not a glamorous red carpet celebrity activist position. This was a conscious pivot into the least glamorous, most grueling, and most essential part of the industry. She poured her energy into her union, SAGAFTRA, the Screen Actors Guild, American Federation of Television and Radio Artists. To understand this move, you must understand her past. This was not an abstract political gesture. This was deeply, profoundly personal. This fight was, in its entirety, for Bibi Besh. Bibi was the quintessential working actor, the one who lived job to job. For actors like Bibi, the union was not a symbolic entity. It was everything. It was the union contract that mandated a lunch break, that ensured producers paid into a pension fund, and that set the minimum salary. Most importantly, it was the union's health plan. For decades, an actor's entire year was structured around a single, terrifying goal: earning just enough to qualify for health insurance. Samantha had grown up in a single-parent household where this anxiety was a constant, low-level hum. This was not a fight for more fame. It was a fight for health care. It was a fight for the basic dignity of a middle-class creative life. She had also seen in the most brutal way what powerlessness looked like. She had been a 23-year-old girl, completely helpless against a media inferno that picked her life apart, that sold her partner's 911 call, that turned her grief into a commodity. She had seen how the industry could work its young, brilliant talents to the bone. Her fight for the union was also a fight for protections. Protections for minors, for working hours, and against the predatory forces that saw actors not as human artists, but as disposable assets. She was armed with this generational knowledge, this personal trauma, and the quiet, steely resolve of a survivor. And she went to work. This was not a press release-driven affair. This was policy. It was healthcare policy, pension policy, and the arcane, complex, and vital language of contract negotiations. It was sitting in fluorescent-lit boardrooms. It was reading 500-page binders. It was work, the unglamorous, unseen, foundational work that holds the entire industry together. It was the work of a boss, the work of a COO, the work of the very characters she was now playing on screen. And she was good at it. She was intelligent, she was articulate, she was passionate, and she was, above all, credible. She was not a dilettante. She was one of them. She was the granddaughter of high art and the daughter of the working class. She could speak both languages. In October 2015, the It Girl was a distant memory. The character actor was well established. But on that day, a new identity became official. Samantha Mathis was elected National Vice President, Actor-Performer of SAGAFTRA. This was not an honorary title. This was one of the highest-ranking elected positions in the entire national union, representing 160,000 members. She was re-elected in 2017, proving that her leadership was not a fluke. It was effective. Her peers trusted her. She had found her new purpose. It wasn't in front of the camera, but in the negotiating room, fighting for the thousands upon thousands of actors, just like her mother had been and just like she was. And then in 2023, her two worlds, the trauma of her past and the purpose of her present, converged in a historic, fiery, and deeply personal war. On July 14th, 2023, SAG-AFTRA went on strike against the AMPTP, the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers, the studios, the streamers, the machine. It was a historic 118-day strike that brought Hollywood to a grinding halt. And the issues at stake were not just about money, they were existential. They were in a way that must have resonated to her very core about the two things her life had been defined by: legacy and loss. The first issue was residuals. This was the Bibi Besh fight. In the old world, when a show reran on television, actors got a small residual check. Those checks were what actors lived on between jobs and what allowed them to qualify for health insurance. The new world of streaming had destroyed that. The working actor middle class was being systematically dismantled. The second issue was artificial intelligence AI. This was a new, terrifying, and deeply personal battle. The studios wanted the right to scan a background actor's likeness, pay them for one day of work, and then own their digital ghost forever, to be used in any project without further consent or compensation. For any actor, this is a ghoulish proposition. But for Samantha Mathis, a woman who had been haunted by the real ghost of her partner for 30 years, a woman whose public image had been inextricably and painfully tied to a tragedy she did not control, the idea of a corporation stealing your likeness, your very essence, and turning it into a digital puppet, it was a horror show. It was a fight for the very humanity of the actor. And Samantha Mathis was on the front lines. But she wasn't just another celebrity holding a sign for a photo op. She was a leader. As a high-profile former vice president and a current national board member, she was a key figure in the strike. She wasn't just another celebrity holding a sign. She was part of the union's core leadership, voting on the proposals and rallying the members. This was the full circle moment. In 1993, a 23-year-old Samantha Mathis had been hounded by cameras, a traumatized, grieving girl fleeing in terror from the media machine. In 2023, a 53-year-old Samantha Mathis commanded the cameras. She stood at podiums. She gave interviews to The Hollywood Reporter and the Nightly News. But she wasn't talking about her trauma. She wasn't talking about her past. She was speaking with precision, with authority, and with a cold, righteous anger. She was speaking about policy. She was explaining the complexities of AI-generated likenesses. She was breaking down the economics of streaming residuals. She was a leader, a strategist, and a passionate advocate, articulating the stakes to the public. The woman who had been defined by Hollywood's cruelty, the machine that took her partner and ground down her mother, was now, 30 years later, one of the key leaders helping define Hollywood's future. As a member of the national board that ultimately approved the contract, she was part of the body that looked the machine right in the eye and forced it to blink. Samantha Mathis's story is a powerful human lesson. It's a reminder that the worst moments of our lives do not have to be the end of our story. She took the unimaginable trauma of her youth, the public death of her partner, the private loss of her mother, and she metabolized it. She turned it from a poison into an antidote. She didn't just survive Hollywood. She is now actively, powerfully, and effectively working to make it a better, safer, and more equitable place for the generations of artists who will come after her. The girl who once dyed her hair to look strong has become one of the strongest women in her industry.